This is the Prestigious Initiative. Welcome. I'm Chris Beane. Today we're going to be diving into a topic that is crucial for leaders navigating in today's working climate. We have Rachel Anderson, owner of Pivot Studios, joining us to explore the human-centric leadership. Rachel has over 15 years of experience in leadership and leading global strategies and helping businesses grow through expertise and marketing with leadership. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. I'm very excited to be here.
So, Rachel, why would somebody want to listen to today's conversation?
I think that the working world has evolved beyond where I think the normal person would have typically consented. And what that also impacts is the way that they're managed and led on a day to day basis. So if they want to hear about what it looks like for a leader to take a human approach, if they want to hear about how work itself has changed, what that means for us in cultures, then I think this is a perfect episode for them.
Wonderful. So you've transitioned from leading strategies at a global level to now focusing more leadership on developing teams. What inspired that shift, and what key lessons did you take with you along the way?
Yeah, so this transition has been years in the making, going from a real marketing leader focused person and career into one that really wants to help managers. And it really starts all the way back pre my working life. I was really raised, luckily, in an organization that was all about giving women tools to be great leaders. And so I had this expectation going into corporate life that everyone had these tools, that this was just a norm to know how to do the businessy things. And it was a rude awakening when I really got there and realized that not only was that not the expectation, very few leaders had any tools whatsoever. There was a recent statistic that was released that 85% of managers have no formalized training now as they assume their roles. And so, as I started becoming a student of the culture of work, the culture of leaders from both experiential and observed interactions, I realized that there's a huge gap between what we need as humans in a working environment from the people that lead us. And what we can actually give them. And so I was able to use my marketing experience, understanding what it means to think like the customer, what it means to help people through change management. That's a whole nother certification that I got at one point to help me with my marketing things. And even my background in communication to kind of merge ideas and concepts into, so what does that look like if we turn that internal to our own companies? And as I developed as a leader, I put those into place in my own teams. What does it look like to be what I now call a human-centric leader, someone who really prioritizes the well-being and development of the people under their care, and saw incredible success. And so now I really, have a huge passion for helping other managers do the same. I think it can make a huge impact. So I decided to make that shift from being a primarily marketing leader into being a leader who helps other leaders.
Yeah, it's interesting because it seems like a lot of business owners, they take their top employees and they think, oh, they're great at sales or whatever it is. So let's put them in a management role because they will, of course, succeed in that area as well. But often that doesn't equal once succeeding in one area does not equal succeeding in another area because they're missing those tools that managers really need to have. And they may be great at sales, but they don't know how to lead and manage the people that are doing the sales. They can tell you how to make the sales, but telling somebody how to do sales and managing those people are two vastly different things. Um, okay, so what are some qualities that you think make up a high performing manager or leader?
I think that a quality in a leader, specifically that makes them high performing, can vary depending on the situation. So, one of the most trending things right now about leadership is situational leadership. So, contextualizing what it means for you to lead within a particular place or time or event. But I would say if you think about the ways that people become leaders, I think there are certain qualities there that are sort of timeless. And so I would look at things like, I guess it's more soft skill related, but do they have the ability to navigate and resolve conflict? I would probably say that's one of the number one tools I would give to a new or up and coming leader to really help them manage the practical aspects of being a leader. The other one is, do they have the ability to clearly communicate ideas or expectations to the people around them? And that honestly can be up to their supervisors or down to their members to actually do the tasks. And then I would also say, as far as practical qualities, and I'm going to stretch the term quality right here because I think what you had to say was really important, is do they know the basic tasks that they now are supposed to do as a manager? Because to your exact point, it's actually a different role. It's just a different role. So the person that is really, really incredible as a salesperson, as an engineer, as a marketer, even doing the individual tasks, which typically, in the industry I come from, which is a lot of tech and kind of corporate, we would often call individual contributors. That is a completely different job scope and requirement set than actually managing. So do they have some of these overarching soft skill qualities like conflict resolution, communication? I would even say a bonus if you understand how to lead people through change, since that's the only constant in business. But truly, do you understand the role that it is to be a leader, to be a manager of people?
Okay, so in my experience, management or leading, and I'm going to use those terms kind of interchangeably. Leading people, I think, comes from experience. And while I think a certain portion of that can be learned in a classroom, sitting down and listening to somebody lecture about it, there's a piece that's missing there. I heard a quote one time that, Jimmy read a book on how to do math, and he was a great accountant, and he read a book on how to farm and fish, and he was a great farmer and fisher, but he read a book on how to swim, and then he drowned because that's not something you can learn from a book. So how much of leading people can you learn from a book or from a lecture or somebody speaking about it versus how much of it needs to be hands-on? And then I guess a caveat to that is how much of that you are doing hands-on is based on the culture or environment of that specific organization that you're working with.
So this is a really juicy question. I like it. It's so like robust. Um, there is, of course, sort of a nurture nature aspect to being a leader, especially a good leader. And there are people that have the inclination towards understanding what it takes to connect to another person, human to human, and kind of lead them through. Or maybe they just have great charisma that allows them to have people that want to follow them, right? So there are sort of nature things at play. But I really think that being a manager or being a leader is just like any other muscle. You have to practice in order to develop that thing. So you're right. You can't just read a book and then think that you can swim. But there are certain things that you can do to practice. And I think the first is being willing to practice imperfectly. No one that I know of, when they try to learn a new skill or even, go to the gym and do a new exercise or whatever that looks like, is good at it when they first start. There's definitely beginner's luck. I am a fan of it myself. I tend to flex that muscle anytime I can. But the long-term aspect of practicing shows me that, yes, it's literally the first time. The first time I get lucky, and then the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth, I'm terrible. And so you have to really be willing to be terrible on the path to being determined to be good. And eventually you do get there. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can decide that you don't have to navigate that alone, which I think some people think that if they're going to be good at something, it's just because of their sheer willpower that they'll be able to do it. But there's a lot of people that can help you, including the people that you're supposed to be leading. So when I work with leaders, I talk a lot about different aspects for them to lean into. One could be vulnerability. One of the number one ways to build trust with someone is to be vulnerable with them. And an easy way for us to win at that as leaders is to just tell the people we're supposed to be managing, I'm not sure if this is the right thing to do. So let's do this thing, and then we'll try it, and you can give me feedback, and we'll adjust, and then we'll do something better or different. And that kind of honesty allows them to enter in with you into the experiment. And they give you way more grace and understanding because they're like, oh, yeah, of course, everybody's bad at something eventually. At least you're acknowledging it, right? But there's other ways that you can be aware as well to help yourself do imperfect practice. There's this thing called the Johari window that I like to reference because it makes this like quadrant. And each of the quadrants have a different aspect of how much you know about yourself. If you're listening, you should totally look this up because it's a great visual. But basically, one of the axis is known to unknown about you. And then the other axis is what you know versus what other people know or can observe. And so, as you think about the different quadrants, you have things that other people can see that you cannot see. You have things that you know and everybody knows. You have things that is hidden to everybody. And until you experience something, or maybe it's a maturity thing that you don't know until you know, then it moves into another quadrant and you kind of work through those things. And so, there are definitely tools that you can use to give you support as you learn these behaviors. But ultimately, you just have to be willing to try to do a good job and commit to doing it over a long period of time to then eventually become a great leader.
And I think, okay, so you hit the nail on the head in my eyes with the honesty of and being open with the team. Listen, hey guys, I don't know necessarily how to do this. I want the feedback. Let me know what you think. I think that a lot of times, especially new managers, they feel like they have to have all the answers. They feel like they have to be the one directing people and telling them where to go. They don't want to have that feedback because then that means that, oh man, I'm letting my team know I don't actually know what I'm doing. Where on the flip side, that's actually better because then you can get their input. You can make sure they're in the right roles for themselves. And then that creates that openness of conversation so that they can come to you if they have an issue, if they have an idea, if they have an opportunity for whatever it is. But if you don't have that, if you don't set that up really from the beginning, it's hard to get that later on. And so that changes what it means to be a leadership in that leadership role. And I think that moves into the human-centric leadership. What's your definition of that?
Yeah, I have been defining human centric leadership as prioritizing the well being and development of the individual over the organization on the path to achievement. And I think those are all really important elements. So I'm going to break it down just a little bit since sometimes in audio it's good to kind of repeat. So the first is that you're prioritizing the well being and development. So that basically means the health, mental health, and growth trajectory aspect of the individual, the employee under your care. Yes, over the organization, which I'll come back to for a moment, on the path to achievement. So you do not have to choose an either or. It doesn't have to be prioritizing the person or the results of the organization. It can be both. And so, as managers, we often think in order to hit this incredibly aggressive business goal or this revenue goal or this objective, this project, whatever, that has to be the ultimate. But the structure of business is to make you achieve that objective. So the structure is already there for that to be prioritized from an organizational perspective. That is part of your job as a manager, is to make sure that that happens. What you have power and autonomy to choose is the way that that happens. The how question is up to you. Do you want to do that by being a micromanager and making sure that every single detail is always passed through your purview before it goes forward? Do you want to do that by overworking your employees and having unrealistic expectations, in my personal opinion? Do you want to do that in fill in the blank? There's like dozens of ways that you can choose the how. And so in human centric leadership, the how is by making sure that the employee is cared for on the path to those results. And so the reason that's so important is that there are so many statistics about how engaged and productive employees are more profitable to the business. So it doesn't have to be only a like feel good decision. It can be an actual strategic business decision to make people important.
And okay, so I know that having met with a number of business owners, if they are only focusing on their business, but they're letting their personal life kind of slip and not be where they want it to be at, then the business also slips and is not where it's at. And of course, it would make sense that if that happens on the owner of the business, then every step of the process, every employee, if they're only focused on doing the job and hitting the marks, but then their personal life is suffering because of the job or whatever other reason, then the job is also going to suffer. So as the leader, as the manager, if we can not only focus a portion of time on work, at work, like we're supposed to, but also invest in the employees that we have and how they can best improve themselves to whatever future they want to have, then they will be more likely to show up to work. They'll be more likely to put better effort into the work because they know the investment that the company has made in their own personal achievements.
That's right. Yeah. I usually say it in this way. I usually say we are humans who go to work. We're not workers who go home. And a lot of times I think businesses, because as a business, it is your responsibility. Think of it as a business. And you don't kind of remember the humanity of what it means to just be a human in everyday world. We think that there's this like switch that we can just turn off and divorce who we are at work from who we are everywhere else. And the truth is that we see it all the time failing. In the US, we just had elections last week, I think. And regardless of, outcomes and things, I don't know anyone who didn't feel some which way about what happened. And that affected productivity and even national sentiment for at least the whole week. I think we're still dealing with some of it. And so how do you tell someone like, hey, I don't want you to bring that emotion here? Like that's not, it doesn't belong here, because it's impossible. There's that show on I think Apple TV called Severance, where it basically has some of this where you can just switch off the employee memories from work and life. And I'm not gonna lie, as someone who's a chronic overachiever, I would love to like engage with that. I feel like that would really help some of my like mental peace. But it's just not realistic. And so we see that with companies now spending, gosh, I want to say $300 billion on wellness programs and other expenditures for their employees now. You see that in the fact that the retention rate for employees generally is about 2 years. So I think it's 1 in 3 people leave every 2 years, something like that. And so you have this incredible turnover because employees are looking for something. And by employees, I do also mean managers. Managers are looking for something. We also have basic needs that have to be met. And if that's not happening at the business, then the business is going to see churn. And if the business sees churn, then that's more expensive to get more people to fill those roles. And that becomes another cost center to the business, which means they then have to put some sort of spend into it to get it to stop, which, this whole snowball effect in business. And so, you talked about leaders who are chronically terrible at it. And you're right. I've met a lot of leaders too who just really get wrapped into the performance. And I honestly have a whole nother tangent I could go on about systems in place that encourage that. But I think at the end of the day, we should start with remembering that everybody is first a human, and it's probably like 5th on the list for their priorities in life to be a worker. And so how do we just let that reality live, and we can work with that?
Okay, so let's say I'm a manager at a business who is not currently prioritizing the employees, and I want to adopt this human-centric approach, and I want to bring this to the managers, my managers, my leaders. What does that look like? I know that a lot of times businesses are cutting resources. They have a pressure to do more with less. What does that conversation look like to the upper management?
So the first thing I would encourage them with is that managers create microcultures regardless of the macro culture with which they have to exist. And that can be both societally and that can be within your organization. So, for example, I worked a lot with some companies around the globe at one point, and the behaviors in the office in Japan were extremely different than the ones here, just because culturally they had different priorities. And so we had to learn how to work within their assumed macro culture environment. And one of the ways we did that is by making our own team values. And so that's where I would encourage managers to start. What are your personal values that you bring to the team? And how do you make sure that your personal team has a microculture that is human-centric? And so team values can look really different. They're based on both behaviors and what you want to value as a manager. So for example, I want my team to be efficient, and therefore my value is early communication so that we can fix problems, right? Like maybe that's the kind of value behavior pairing. Maybe it's that you want to value, I'm trying to think of another really good one, on time performance. And therefore, your value is transparency and workload. And so you kind of make these different values and behaviors that you want to emulate. And then as a team, you need consent on those things. So you as a manager can decide these are my 4 values that I want our team to stand for. And then these are, as a team, are yeses, yes, 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 yes. I like to verbalize it because I think there's more ownership when people have to speak it rather than type it or say it. And that's a great place to start. Of course, they have to be authentic to the leader, and the leader has to be equally committed to them for them to be successful. So that's a really hefty, it sounds easy, but like that's a really hefty place to start, but is a really, really good place to start. So, for example, my personal values that I work with my teams on are 4 simple phrases because I want them to be able to remember them and I want them to be able to live by them. And so my personal values are, I want everybody on this team to be able to say readily, I'm sorry, I need help, I made a mistake, or I don't know. Because we can work with all those things, right? I don't know. Great. Let's get clarity, or let's find someone who does, or let's get you the training. I'm sorry. Easy to like fix mistakes, have ownership, move on, right? There's these like byproducts that come from the values that we hold. And that can really escalate out into the rest of the organization. And so, as a manager, you can definitely try to convince your leader and start from the top down approach. But I like to encourage people to just start with what you can control because it does make significant impact. And then from there, you can talk to other peers about the success you're seeing on your team, about the way that your team is bonding or doing better or better work or longer retention. And that kind of commitment to it and escalation can really have a ripple effect through the organization. Now, of course, when I talk about this with teams and in workshops, there is a responsibility for every level of the business. There is an organizational responsibility. You can decide as a culture that we will be human first. And what does that look like? What are the policies that we have to put in place in order to support the behaviors that would come from that? There's, of course, a leadership aspect where you'll need to reinforce that this is true because it will not be the expectation from most people's experiences in business that, if I say you have the ability to take, free PTO, that's one that I think is a good example. Like, why am I blanking on the word? Like, requested time off is one time, like something I heard, but it's like a unlimited PTO. It's not unlimited. You can't just like get hired and then be like, I'm going to take 6 months off, right? That's not how it goes. It's like sort of a squishy, not really unlimited, but unlimited. So as a leader, if you're like unlimited, well, what does that mean? And then you too need to take that time off. Like be a model yourself. Of course, we've talked about the manager, but then the individual. I talk a lot about productivity at the individual level and how you can create boundaries, healthy boundaries, and what that looks like for you to have creative margin and really being able to prioritize your own health and well-being. And so I think, as managers, bringing it into an organization can be as simple as this is my how, and I will do this to create my own microculture. And if you want to escalate, great. There's responsibilities for the entire organization if they all want to adopt it in. But it's something that can be a personal decision, which is what I think is so empowering by it.
All right, so a couple things on that I really like. So setting up as the leader, setting up the values for the team, I think is so important because then it gives the team an opportunity to align with the leader. And if they can be in alignment with the leader, then there's no question if they're doing the right thing, if they're asking the right questions, if they're moving in the right direction because they're in line with whatever the overarching goals of that leader are. And the next kind of thing is that also gives them, let's say, micro goals to kind of shoot for because they can work with inside those values if they're specific and clear enough for the whole team to understand that they can make sure that they are doing those things and they're reaching those small goals. And then again, the leader knows. And the other part that you talked about there is and you didn't necessarily say it, but I'm gonna explicitly say it because I think it's important as the leader, not just to point out the people who are doing the bad things, but to point out the people who are also achieving and doing the good things, because that is just as, if not more important than pointing out the negativity. Because if you're always on the negative side, if you're always looking for the negative, you're always going to find the negative, and you're going to be that guy or that lady or that leader, and that's not who you want to be. So if you can
Yeah.
praise your team for the things that they're doing, they're going to do more of those things. And if you can do, I'm a fan of the 1 minute manager, where it's private, public praise and private reprimand. If you can praise them publicly so that the whole everybody in the team or organization can see it, then they will also know, oh, that's the things that we're supposed to be doing. I want the praise. Maybe I can do those things as well. I'll get praised for it next time. Hey everyone, it's Chris Beane here from the Prestigious Initiative. If you're looking to level up your life and unlock your full potential, I've got some exciting news for you. My recent guest, Joel Gandara, has an incredible program called 31 Days to Become a Better Man. Joel has packed years of life-changing insights into this easy-to-read book, guaranteed to help you rethink your shortcomings and redefine what it means to be a man in today's world. But that's not all. Joel also offers powerful one-on-one sessions and group classes to guide you on your journey. And he has a special offer for the Prestigious Initiative listeners. You can get $19.99 off the program when you use code PRESTIGIOUS at checkout. Don't wait. Take your first steps towards becoming the best version of yourself today. Visit 31dailychallenges.com and use the code PRESTIGIOUS for your discount. And now back to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a 5-to-1 ratio from a psychological perspective. 5 positives in order to outweigh 1 negative. And so as a leader, if you are not being extremely verbal about the things that people are doing well, even really small things like, hey, I saw you send that email and it was so well written. I mean, when's the last time somebody told you that you like wrote a good email, right? But sometimes you have right, exactly. So sometimes you have to have really complicated concepts or decisions in an email. Great. Take that chance to just be like, thank you. Or, hey, you took this off my plate. I saw that you got it done. I really appreciate that. That meant a lot. It doesn't have to be these major milestones that you wait for. It can be really small things. So I think you totally have it right. I mean, it's a big deal to make sure that you're calling out the really positive things.
Okay, so can you share some examples of companies who have implemented this approach, and how has it been beneficial for them?
Yeah, there's been a few really great studies that I've been part of, or I guess I was studying them as they've been implementing things. But yeah, so there was one opportunity that is my favorite to talk about that was this creative team that was adopting it through a marketing lens. They had a it was right during COVID. It was a smaller team that they were trying to escalate into a larger organization. They decided to take their creative team and really implement it there first. And so as the team implemented some of these ideas and behaviors, and of course, it's really different for organization, team structure, even the individual manager, right? Because authenticity is a key component of it. So there's not a cookie cutter structure or outcome that you can kind of implement. They saw incredible results. In the next 2 years, they saw 300% growth on their team. The manager was so specific and demonstrating such incredible results that they kept getting more and more responsibilities, which meant their actual team scope grew. They had 27% revenue increase as a direct effect of that team's responsibilities and what they were doing for them. And no one left. There was 100% retention, which is an incredible save. I mean, the statistic is 75% on average what it takes to replace someone of their annual salary. So if someone's costing the company $100 or 100K a year, it takes about 75K to replace them. So that's real money, just like out the door for just getting to retain your staff. So that was a really incredible statistic. I think that's probably an anomaly case study. But there's been other ones that have had much more subtler implementation, but greater effects for long-term retention. And so there's another company I was working with that was more in the educational tech space. And they needed some help as they had a lot of senior leaders that were transitioning. They were reorganizing their entire departments. And so this was an opportunity for them to sort of start over and try to implement some things from scratch. And what they saw is that their team was able to start communicating more quickly and easily between functions because now multiple managers had this on their docket and were trying to emulate or model these kinds of behaviors on their team. There were people that were able to kind of come forward and have or request different working, I'm going to say scenarios, but kind of styles in order to meet the need of where they were as a human outside of work. And that made it really successful, whether that was alternative working hours, whether that was one of them needed different like remote accommodations. And so they saw other ways that investment in them as individuals really started to benefit the business. And they became highly productive and engaged employees, which was kind of a changing course, especially in the time period where, a lot of times when organizational change happens, it's a very tenuous time for employees. A lot of people are uncertain about their jobs, and it really was able to settle everybody into staying and seeing through all of those changes. And I don't think anybody left during that time period, even though often you get, I want to say it's 20, somebody will have to fact check me, but I think it's like 20% churn usually when there's like big organizational change. And so it was a really great testament to how, some of that transparency and creating team values can give people something to hold on to when they think that they're honest and truly valued.
All right. So as you're sharing those, I'm thinking, and this probably maybe doesn't work, and that's okay. You can tell me I'm wrong. I'm just trying to think. Okay, so as the leader of the team, you have the leader of the team, you have the leader of that leader, but going in the other direction. Let's say we have not a product-based business, but we have a service-based business. How what would it look like to implement this type of human-centric leadership across the entire organization? And then how would that impact the people who I'm servicing in that regard? And
Yeah, giving
again,
you a
maybe that's not possible, and that's okay. I just was trying to think about how that would
context
work.
about service because I've worked with a lot of companies that are software as a service. So I want to make sure that our versions of service are the same. Give me an example of like,
Yeah. So selfishly, I'm a professional martial arts instructor, and
mhm.
I am the leader of the school. The owner is the person who is above me, and I am in charge of the like writing the lesson plans, managing the teaching staff, managing the office staff, teaching many, if not all, of the classes. So in that type of based business where I'm interacting with the clients, with the students and their families, I'm trying to imagine what this type of environment would look like if I could adopt some of this, not just for the team, but also for the clients as well.
Okay, this is a great question and has been a hot topic with some of my peers, some of my the people that I work with, because human-centric leadership is based not entirely on the premise of productivity, but it has a huge component of what does it mean to be productive in this current working environment. But that working environment is often contextualized as like big business, either private or public companies, but less so about retail or service in this context in these other areas. And so if we're framing it into some of these other type industries, it does become much more tricky because what it means to be productive becomes extremely specific. For example, Old Navy. If you're hired at Old Navy, you are technically paid by showing up and being in person for the 5 hours, 4 hours, whatever your shift length is. And that is why you're getting paid. Then they measure your success based on how well you do the job, right? So if you're present, you get paid. If they keep you, it's because you're doing a good job. And that's not necessarily true in some of these other businesses. I think that they think it's true, but it's not when you break down how do you get promotions and raises. It's not on the quality of work. It's just on doing work, usually, right? So there's like a different scale. And so as you sort of take some of these aspects of human-centric leadership and look at it within different industries, especially service-based industries like you're talking about, There are certain things that you should think about. How does this apply within the context with which I live? And I think the easiest one to start with is the idea of team values and psychological safety. That is a great place to start. So, in the people that are required to be here in order for this function to happen, this service to happen, to grow, to achieve the goals, there has to be a number of people. And maybe it's just a team of one, but probably not. But there has to be a number of people. So, what are the things that we as a team will demand of each other? Are we going to say that our value is transparency? Are we going to say our value is I think transparency is such a good one. I don't know. Team like bonding, or is it going to be on time arrival? Is it right? Like, what are the values that make this service successful? And I would probably look at it in the lens of my customer as much as my team members, because the martial arts example is great. Like, if you're an instructor and you're late to class, then all the people that came to take that class are going to be impacted. You're going to have a negative relationship with your boss or owner. Like, it's a whole thing, right? So maybe one of the values is, in fact, being prompt, and that's fine. So starting there, I think, is a really big one. And then thinking about what does it take for us to create psychological safety. So Brene Brown, who's a great researcher on shame and vulnerability, and really studies people and has some incredible statistics about the human psyche, she found that the number one indicator of team success was psychological safety. And that is things like keeping confidence and building trust. And so any organization is going to benefit from making sure that their employees know that when they're at work, this is a place where you can be safe. And you do that by creating values that make it clear what the expectation is for that individual when they're present. And so while I think that a lot of clients that I typically work with are in a different context, hence the productivity, like, okay, maybe it's a little bit different. I think that the basic principles really apply, and in some ways can make it a lot stronger and a more long-lasting environment using them.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for that. And shifting gears a little bit, in this new post-COVID time, the rise of remote work and diverse teams across the nation are all over the place. What tips do you have for leaders who are trying to support their teams and maintain engagement across this remote landscape that we live in now?
Remote teams can be really tricky, especially for managers who come from a very traditional background. Traditional meaning maybe you've been a manager for 20, 40 years at this point, and now you're having to learn an entirely new way to manage. Back even 40 years ago, if you were seen, you were considered working. And so showing up in the office was the minimum of saying you were a good employee. And now with remote work, that's completely false. There's no way you can just see them 100% of the time and be like, they're productive because I can see them. So I would say the very first thing to do there is to make regular opportunities for engagement with your team. And that can look really different depending on what your team is and what you do and the industry you're in and all that kind of stuff. But I find that kind of as a minimum is, what is the way that I'm going to contact you in an emergency? Is that the phone? Is that a text message? Is that fill in the blank? What is the way I'm going to contact you if I need you to know something, but you can take your time responding? Is that an email? Is that a Slack message? Is that some other form of internal documentation, et cetera? And then having regular touch points with your team. And so I like to start with a one-on-one with every member, even if it's only, half an hour a week, and then also a team meeting so that we can build that psychological safety as a team. And so when I talk about remote management, it's a lot. Anytime a manager or a leader is nervous about it, it's typically a reflection of them and their confidence in being able to report to their supervisors that their team is worthwhile, that they're producing, that they're on task, that the manager knows what's happening, right? So there's a little bit of a internal growth that needs to happen for the manager. And I think an easy way to do that is start by predictability. When are you going to touch base with them? When are you going to get that information? How do you want to show up for your superior? And I have all kinds of tools that I help them with. And there's, templates you can use to help with that. That's the team value so that they know you expect certain things. It's the regular communications. But remote work doesn't have to be as scary and complicated as it is. But really, that comes down to how specific have you gotten with how you expect your team to engage, and do you follow up on that regularly?
Okay, so as you're communicating that to me, I'm trying
Mm.
to imagine and I'm sure this is not it's not possible to answer this question, but trying to imagine what a quote unquote standard, very basic outline of a manager's week would look like. So because if I'm managing people from across the nation and I'm checking in with them half an hour, a week, and then we have a team meeting that's maybe an hour once a week, or like
Mhm.
what does that look like in trying to stay true and stay productive myself while also maintaining that productiveness from my team.
Yeah, this is a great question because it makes me think full circle back to the beginning of our conversations, and that always makes me laugh, but I love it. So I would go back to our initial conversation of, do you know what it means to be a manager?
Mm,
Because the very first shift from individual contributor into manager role is that you no longer are the number one producer. You are
mm,
now the the poop umbrella, I'll say, because I don't know what demographic your audience listening is. But your now primary responsibility is to clear the path for all your employees to be productive.
mm,
And so, yes, there are kind of white collar managers, quote unquote, now where you are expected to both manage and produce to a certain level. But I would argue that your number one responsibility is to the people under your care. And I would say that that is probably true. Just, I'm going to say hard stop, but especially as a human centric leader, your number one priority is to make sure that they can do their jobs, because there's nothing that sucks away time more than if somebody does the wrong thing
mm.
and wastes time and opportunity because you haven't spent time to clarify. You haven't spent time to clear those obstacles. You haven't spent the time to make sure that they understood what done looks like. And that's a direct reflection on not you as a producer, but you as a manager. And so that's where, when you make that switch, it's so important that you understand and have the tools to be able to actually do this new job.
And I suppose that is going to be a portion of the things that you're going to be talking about in the meetings. I know meetings a lot of times get a bad rap because, oh, this meeting could have been an email or whatever. But if you're doing meetings like that to make sure everybody is on the same page, everybody is aligned, everybody understands their individual mission, sort of say, then they can go forth to do it. Then you just check in with them on a one-on-one type of basis. Hey, how are we doing on this? Okay, great. Boom. All right, great. Let's move to the next one. And then maybe a little bit of that one-on-one is okay, let's check in on this. But also, hey, tell me, you said you were gonna go to the movies this weekend or whatever. Tell me about that. Or do you have that human part element to it along with that check-in to make sure that they're on the right page? And I'm sure from time to time those one outweighs the other, probably back and forth as it needs to in the moment that it occurs. But that's what those meetings are about, not just to monopolize the employee's time. Oh man, I could have
Mhm.
done all these other things.
Mhm.
No, we're just checking in just to make sure everybody understands the mission at hand. Everybody understands the overarching mission, but everybody understands the role that they play in achieving that mission, and the intent of the leader is applied to everybody across the team.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I had an employee once who um, I would always open the floor of our one-on-ones and with the same way. And I always ask him about his life and what was going on and how his daughter was. He had just had a beautiful little girl. And I think that while most of my one-on-ones, that part, the like, how's your well-being? How are you as a human? Was like 15 minutes of our meeting.
Hmm.
For him, it was like maybe 3. if I was lucky, it would be like a 5 minute, like, oh, I actually did this thing, blah, blah, blah. He just wasn't really into it. And that was fine. But every once in a while, he'd be able to take that opportunity to say, hey, actually, this thing is happening in my life and I'm just not fully here. And I just think about how important, even though most of the time it was like a superfluous part of the meeting that he clearly didn't really think was important, the consistency of showing up and demonstrating that you care about that thing allowed him to know that that was his moment to tell me things were going on. And that allowed me to be a better supportive manager. So if that meant, hey, I actually need to offload some of his work so that he can do his best 100% job on less things and we still get everything done, then I need to take this moment to do that. Or if it's just simply like, hey, if I need to clear the way in this other project in order for him to do both things well, great. Like the consistency is, I think, sometimes undervalued as managers because you think, oh, like they'll have other times to get to me or other opportunities to tell me things. And if you do that enough times, then it's no longer a trusted relationship, a trusted moment. And that suffers not just the production of that one person, but the entire team structure. And so, yeah, I think, these meetings are extremely important, especially for remote workers. And as managers, having a priority there makes a huge impact.
Okay, so I think that that brings us to the next topic, which is communication. I think obviously that
Mhm.
as a leader, effective communication is essential. What what strategies do you think leaders can use to ensure their team stay aligned and motivated towards their company goals with that communication element being at the heart of that?
Yeah, communications is my OG part of like business. And I can tell you for sure, I am so grateful for it because it has just shaped everything for me from an employee to a manager to my own business and everything in between. And so I'm not going to tell you the 100 different ways that I think managers could really use communication and the refinement of communication to win. But I think the best one I could give, the best tip I could give, is that all of your employees need to understand the value they bring to the organization and how their specific tasks align to goals and objectives in the organization. And the manager needs to be able to communicate that in reverse to their manager and superior.
Mm.
So breaking that down a little bit for value context. If your employee thinks that their work is arbitrary, then A, they shouldn't be doing it. Or B, you should make sure that they understand the importance it has towards the overall business. That helps with retention because now they feel value and purpose. It helps with a quality product because they understand the why behind what they're doing and if it should take 5 hours or if they can get away with a 1 hour and be done, right? It helps clear the way for other ideas and creative alignment. So when they know the context of how they specifically are of need or value for an objective, they then start identifying other people in the organization who are also towards that same objective. And that's where innovation and the most interesting kinds of creativity can happen when you start pairing seemingly unlike things together, right? An engineer and a graphic designer or a salesperson and I don't know, a salesperson and a customer service for support person, right? These like different pairings. And then it also allows them to feel like they have place within the structure itself. Vice versa is also important, though, because how you describe the value of the individual doesn't really matter to a leader typically. Not that, leaders don't care about people, but they're focused on how do we achieve these goals. And so what you should be able to do is then flip the script up on that and say, okay, so and so is working on these 3 projects, which allow us to increase this revenue, which allow us to retain customer retention, which allow us to, build company culture, whatever that objective is. And then that way it shows that your team understands what the leader cares about, which is driving the business forward, making sure that you hit those board required goals or your revenue markers. And so making sure that you have those one-to-one like paths for communication that same message but given in two different ways, I think is an incredibly strategic way to provide clarity both to your management about what you're doing and how you're producing, and also to your team members about why they're important and what they do really matters. And everything from there becomes sort of like offshoots. Like, have you explained it clearly? Do they understand it? Do they know what they're supposed to be doing? Do you not? Do you understand the business objectives? All those other pieces that communication and refining your communication and how you communicate really matters. But I think starting there can be a really good trickle down effect for the way you communicate a lot of other things.
So, Rachel, tell me about Pivot Studios. I know you work with startups and small businesses. What are some common challenges that you see, and how do you help those businesses to achieve sustainable growth?
So Pivot Studios really focuses on three things. We do marketing strategies, organizational realignment, process improvements. And it's because in those areas, we see a lot of small shifts that can make huge impacts, which is why I named my company Pivot Anything. Pivot Studios is what I landed on. But the idea of the pivot to me is just incredibly important. So often we are on the right path and we don't have to do a major overhaul to make a huge difference. It's just tiny tweaks to things. And so as part of that, we really focus on hyper growth companies. So yeah, they could be startups, kind of series funded, SMBs, kind of in that range. And it's looking to help them with marketing support in ways that they either need temporarily or long term. So recently, I had a client who I worked with that was needing me to cover two of their family leave time. It was about 4 months, the two overlapped, for two executives that went out on their marketing team. And so I was able to easily step in, keep things running, consult with them on like, is this the right setup for us? How can we tweak things from an outside perspective to just make things smoother and keep things going? And so Pivot Studios is really there to provide that kind of support and guidance for companies that really want to see the acceleration of their growth and revenue. And of course, if there's things outside of our scope, we have incredible partners we work with that will pull them in and they'll help out with more nuanced or production of things themselves. And so it's really fun to be able to work with a lot of variety of businesses, a lot of different tech companies and businesses that are open to innovative ideas.
Well, Rachel, I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today. You're on human-centric leadership. Your passion for helping leaders and teams to thrive really shines through. And I'm sure listeners have taken many valuable things away. And as we're wrapping up, do you have any key takeaways you want to leave the listeners with?
Yeah, I just want to come back to the idea of it doesn't need to be an all or nothing approach. Taking small steps towards being a human centric leader can make a huge impact over the course of a year. 1% change is 37 times improvement. So just pick one thing you want to start with, start small and practice imperfectly. And I promise you'll see big results.
And if my listeners wanted to get in contact with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
I would love to connect with them on thehumancentricleader.com. Or, of course, if you're interested in the marketing side of the world, makeapivot.com is also available to you. But either website will connect you to both me and each other. And I do hope to hear from some of your readers. I'd love to connect.
Wonderful. As always, listeners, stay tuned for more episodes from the Prestigious Initiative, where we continue to explore ways to improve productivity, leadership, and life. Until next time.